So my topic is national and regional development strategies in the Eurasian Economic Union countries and the swan-crab-pike principle at work. Why I have this title is that I want to stress on the importance of synergy between regional and national development strategies, because when countries form unions, so they have the intention to kind of accumulate, to bring together the potential, economic potential. So if countries have different trade strategies, or if they have different development strategies, it means this union will not work in future, or there wouldn't be very little positive effect of that union. So here my question is whether the strategies, national development strategies, including trade policy, including industrial policy, converge or diverge. And my focus is on core countries, Russia, Belarus, and Kazakhstan. So first of all, some background information that's concerned mostly trade policy. As you can see from this slide, this is average. So these are simple average tariffs applied. And as you can see, Russia and Belarus is red and green. They have almost the same tariffs in average applied for third country, for imports from third countries. And Kazakhstan has more liberal tariff regime. So at some point of time, it was around 6 points. But when the customs union was formed in 2010, so the tariffs converged because of this common external tariff. So, but still, there are some differences due to exceptions. For example, Kazakhstan had around 400 goods exceptions, and some countries also reserved some exceptions. So in terms of trade policy, like Belarus, Russia were almost, the trade policy were almost converged before the establishment of the customs union, but Kazakhstan has more liberal trade policy. So it has to introduce more protections. And just small kind of a remark about Kyrgyzstan and Armenia. Both countries have very liberal trade policy, but so that's applied, what they do now, applied to, in terms of the average tariffs. Armenia is 3.7 and Kyrgyz Republic 4.6, but the WTO commitments allow them to increase the tariffs. So normally they can increase up to 7.5. And Russia, when they joined the WTO, the final bond is 7.6. So nowadays, normally, if Armenia and Kyrgyzstan increase the tariffs, and Russia also has decreased its tariffs, so more or less, we can say agreeable. So they can come to some point. So but this is more talking about average tariffs. So in terms of trade policy, we can see that 2 countries are more protectionist and 3 countries are pursuing more liberal policies. Also when starting this work, I had the question, why these countries should join forming this economic union? And for Belarus and Russia, there was no big problem because, for example, Belarus depends on Russia in terms of imports and exports, and economic union or customs union opens Russian market for Belarus exports, and also it's more easier for Belarus to negotiate low prices for resources, so that's more understandable. But in terms of Kazakhstan, for example, this index shows the trade complementarity. It's to what degree, let's say, exports of Kazakhstan match the imports of Russia. Or in this case, for example, Belarus exports match Russia imports, or Russia imports match Russian exports match Belarus imports. So that's they are kind of natural trading partners. But when it comes to Kazakhstan, for example, especially Russia is the biggest market from which these countries expect most benefits, let's say Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, or Belarus. But trade complementarity, Kazakhstan exports do not match Russian imports. So these 2 economies are competitors. So there is no much benefit in terms of trade. So if there is no much benefits, there are not many benefits in terms of trade, there should be some other factors that influenced Kazakhstan's decision, for example, to enter this Eurasian Economic Union. Or in that case, this might be more long-term development goals, because trade is more, so this analysis is more based on short-term static analysis, and if we look at long-term analysis, for example, attraction of foreign direct investment or development of industry, so this can be some long-term goals. So this is just a continuation of this trade complementarity. Very briefly, these are top Russian imports, around 20 items. This is around 60% of Russian imports. And here are RCA of Belarus, revealed comparative advantage index of Belarus. So it shows in what items Belarus has comparative advantage, or in other words, what items it can produce better. And Belarus has a lot of items which are imported by Russia in which it has comparative advantage. But when it comes, for example, to Kazakhstan, so the country doesn't have much of comparative advantage in producing those products which are mostly imported by Russia. So very low complementarity. Okay, so coming to my approach. So if in terms of trade there is not much benefit for Kazakhstan, so what can be some other reasons? So maybe it's long-term economic goals, long-term economic development. And in my approach, I mostly kind of mixed constructivism with economics, which rarely happens, but there are some works by some American scholars, Kenneth Darden, and also some Cambridge professor, Ha-Jung Chang. So they mostly view these economic development policies as coming from perceptions, especially perceptions of those people whose ideas matter. Let's say in like Belarus, Kazakhstan, Russia are mostly super presidential countries, so the president ideas or some high-ranking officials' ideas matter. So if they have a certain perception of economic development, it means they usually continue with those strategies. And these perceptions are reflected in national development policies. So these leaders having some economic ideas, and these economic ideas are realized in terms of national development policies. And what place has the Eurasian Economic Union or this Eurasian regionalism in general in those national development strategies? So I looked at the discourse, at the text of these national economic strategies. I also had some interviews with officials and experts, and here's some conclusions. So for Belarus, so let's start from Belarus because it's a bit different case. So the basic question is whether these development strategies converge or diverge, national development strategies. So if nations have similar strategies, it means we have this regional level strategy, or it's more likely to arise. So this is what Lukashenko says about economics, his economic ideas. So as you can see, it's more about so he's very critical of market economy, very critical of free trade, so criticizing shock therapy, this Russian approach, and we cannot surrender everything to market, and wise control over prices, and also Belarus development strategy. These ideas are reflected there. So Belarus has price controls, Belarus has employment controls. So usually the companies are strongly advised to keep high employment levels, even with lower salaries. So we can say that Belarus is state capitalism with elements of common economy. So these elements exist in Belarus. And what's the place of Eurasian regionalism and Belarus development strategies? Normally when we look at Belarus, like text by speeches by Lukashenko or official development strategies, there is very little place for Eurasian, very little. So mostly they talk about Russia-Belarus Union, and very limited space for Eurasian regionalism in general. But mostly when it comes to Lukashenko, for example, there are two main reasons that usually are key points here. Access to resources, so the price of natural gas for Lukashenko and normally for Belarus leadership, it should be equal prices for all. Why? Because Belarus doesn't have access to resources, so there should be equal prices for gas and oil for all countries. And equal access to energy systems and also access to markets. For Belarus, it's very important to have access to Russian market for exports. So that's a place of Eurasian regionalism in Belarus development strategy. And also Belarus mostly, when it comes to regional negotiations, they promote more protective region which is more protective towards third countries, but free trade within. So that's more Belarus position. Okay, when it comes to economic ideas in Kazakhstan. So, starting from 1997, so Kazakhstan 2030, so Nazarbayev is mostly stressing on the idea of becoming Central Asian snow leopard. Why snow leopard? So he is mostly referring to East Asian experience. East Asian experience, which is kind of can be interpreted in two different ways. Some more liberal economists interpret it in a way that export-oriented growth, some interventionist economists more interpret it in terms of developmental state concept. But for Nazarbayev, in general, what strategy is implemented in Kazakhstan, it's more of liberal interpretation, more trying to promote export-oriented growth. So, and attracting private investors. So, also it was reflected in Kazakhstan trade policy before joining customs union. So, more liberal trade policy, very low tariffs, and focus on attraction of foreign investors. There are a lot of developmental institutions, but these developmental institutions is not to just increase the role of the state, but they mostly serve as a market-enhancing institutions. They provide finance, they provide just guidance for private sector. They do not kind of enter economy, or these are not totally state-run economy. So Kazakhstan case is more of hybrid economy, when there is a huge role of state, but still private sector is given more space. And the role of Eurasian regionalism, so in Kazakhstan documents and also presidential speeches, the Eurasian regionalism is important for mostly two reasons. And first is a transit potential. So this is a big issue. So some people, let's say in presidential administrations, they believe that the kind of economic decline or decline of Central Asia in general historically happened because of the maritime routes. So when maritime routes started to be used, the Silk Road, kind of the role of Silk Road diminished, and so also it led to decline of the region economically, politically in general. So if we can revive this, so we can expect brighter future. So that's one of the kind of ideologies that exist on the very top. And this cannot be done single-handed, yeah, because in order to export, in order to transit goods from China to Europe and back, so we need a cooperation with Russia, especially with Russia. So that's one of the main roles assigned to Eurasian regionalism, and plus attraction of foreign direct investment, because of small population, Kazakhstan cannot attract huge investment. So to some extent, the policy is to serve as an export platform for foreign businesses to establish business in Kazakhstan and export to Russia. And when it comes to Russia, first of all, so this is mostly from Gaidar, the first one. So in 1990s, Russia had a very liberal approach. So here you see Gaidar saying that they're trying to replace old system with a new one, and to do so that the change will be irreversible. So shock therapy, yeah. So to do it in the way that it will be irreversible. So Russian policy more of liberal economics, especially in 1990s, and even Putin in 2000s, he continued with this more, we can say, neoliberal approach in economics, and it's still there, even if today Russia is introducing sanctions and others, but the economy still, we can say it's a hybrid economy with a huge role of state, but still more space for private sector. But in terms of trade policy, so in 2000s when customs union was forming, Russian approach was still unclear. So to some extent, Putin criticizing free trade, which is in deep crisis, as he says, but in the same article he says that he wants to disseminate this free trade principle from Atlantic to the Pacific by creating free trade agreement between Europe and Eurasian countries. So that's undecided position. And especially Russia after Crimea, it's even more difficult to understand what will be trade policy, what will be development policy. Will the role of state increase in the economy? Will they go to more protectionist policies or continue with open economy? So that's questions that usually make it difficult for regional development policy to come. And with Russia undecided, it's very difficult to talk that we have some convergence on regional level. So to one extent we have Kazakhstan and also Kyrgyzstan more pursuing or trying to pursue more free trade, liberal trade policies. On the other hand, we have Belarus that trying to introduce protection on the regional level, and Russia still undecided. So that's one of the problems with regional level convergence of development policies. And in this case, it's very difficult to expect some positive benefits in terms of economic development from this regional organization. And what can be contribution of Armenia and Kyrgyz Republic to the Eurasian Economic Union function? Also another question. So whether they will further liberalize trade in terms of economic union and third countries, or they will just take the rules established before they joined. So these are some other questions that need to be answered. Okay, so here at this stage, I think I can finish my presentation.
Hi, Vladimir Volova, yesterday presentation geopolitical approach, and still in your presentation it's even more clear, I would say, that economic benefit of the Eurasian Economic Union is very doubtful.
Of course.
So, from your opinion, would you agree with the statement that political background for the moment and at the beginning of the formation of the Eurasian Economic Union was much more important than economy? Because in any country we could take, maybe except of Russia, because it's always said that for bigger countries it's always more useful to form a union. So for any country except of Russia, it's not economically benefit from this union. And then we come to the conclusion that maybe some political reasons were more important. Like for example, in case of Kazakhstan, you mentioned two main possible reasons: ideas of Nazarbayev of Eurasianism and possibility of making Kazakhstan transit center. But at once we can say it's only a possibility. For example, if I'm a business, why should I make a business to export? Should make a business in Kazakhstan to export to Russia if I can make business at once in Russia? So my question to me again: do you think that political arguments were more important, and maybe the strategy of Russia, ideas of Russia, pressure from Russia was more important at the beginning and even now for forming of Eurasian Economic Union than economic theory and argument?
So the answer, let's say, especially when I did my research, is kind of can be like that. Each country has its own reason. So we cannot say that political reason dominates, because, for example, for Russia, in my case, what I can say is that it's not even like political issue. It's more kind of identity issue, like where there is an identity debate in Russia, whether it's kind of Western country or is it more something very exclusive with its own path. And this Eurasian Union, Economic Union, it's kind of creating this space, or some people go even further saying it's a kind of Russian world. So there are different very different in Russia perception of Eurasian regionalism, why we need that. Yeah, I think in Russia it's kind of still debate. I cannot hear one kind of clear-cut answer. For Belarus it's more easier, for example. It's but still we can say political, because for Belarus, for Lukashenko, it's like preserving that status quo. They have some socio-economic model which is based on state capitalism, yeah, and on subsidies, on state subsidies, on this price control, on providing these social benefits, very high social benefits, very nice place to live. Yeah, Minsk, for example, and this model can be preserved only when you are a member of economic union, when you are with Russia. Otherwise, you cannot preserve this model. It will just collapse. So that's for Belarus. For Kazakhstan, yes, it's also for Russia and for Kazakhstan in terms of economics, they're talking mostly about potential. For example, Russia has two strategies. One is by, we call it Glaziev report, was done for Putin. Another one is this Mao and others, Nabiulina and others, they created Russia 2020, around 1,000 scholars participated. They prepared it for Medvedev. They also talk about potential. If in future Russia starts to produce high value added products, then Kazakhstan, Belarus and other countries are markets for these products. So in terms of economics, they are mostly talking about potential only.
But I could debate with you, for example, about Belarus. I think Lukashenko would really prefer to take benefits and help of Russia, but not join the Eurasian Economic Union. To get low prices of gas, but not join the Eurasian Economic Union.
But I think at some time Russia pressed too much, so saying join on.
If you want the prices, low prices and our help, please join.
Yeah.
So again, we get to the politics.
I think this example is the Gerald was talking about.
If I may add something, it is related to what we are discussing. Now the reason that I can see for Kyrgyzstan or for even Belarus can be two types of reasons. One, security, both security related. One, military security, the other, energy security, something about which you talked, even you mentioned, maybe subsidized gas. So for Kyrgyzstan also, that could be the reason. Whether the economic union is going to provide that military security, one way or the other, Russia was providing to both Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. But what about energy security? Will it provide them cheaper gas and oil? That is still not clear. Energy charter was mentioned yesterday, but whether it will come through, we are not very clear. Whether the resource-rich countries are willing to, in some way, subsidize, and if they are, then for what? What would be Russia's economic interest? I can understand great power ambitions, or all the countries perhaps want a comfort zone. Russia wants a comfort zone in which it is seen as the leader, as a great power maybe. For military reasons, Kyrgyzstan and maybe to an extent Kazakhstan, both of which border on China, have very extensive and intensive economic interaction with China. So some way they want to somehow create a bulwark against increasing Chinese influence. So for that, the EEU provides a sort of comfort zone that here perhaps China cannot encroach upon. But still some of the things are not clear. Another, whether it will lead to freer movement of labor, which is another major concern for Kyrgyzstan family. So on these issues, if both or either of the presenters can throw some light.
Yeah. Okay.
Just going come back to Vadim, the question of political will or not. I mean, the standard answer really in customs union theory is that customs unions create winners and losers. Therefore, you at least need to have the political will to somehow redistribute within the region or to have some sort of compensatory payments. So I would say without political will at all, you wouldn't have customs unions, you would just have maybe free trade areas. And for that reason, that's now, whatever now the particular motivations at play are here in the Eurasian customs, in the Eurasian Economic Union, I think the starting point is well, this kind of economic integration typically needs a political will behind it. I mean, if you think about the European Union, that was mainly really started as a political project to bind in Germany in the 1950s. And, then these economic benefits from greater integration is then played out over time.
There is an aspect between good political will and oppressive political will. There is a difference. There is a European political will of wishing to make Europe Russia's political system.
Yeah, I think this is a very good point, Vladimir. I think that's now the question is whether this political customs union is will of people or whether it's will of three people in three different countries. It's a big question.
Two of them aged, no?
Two of them aged.
How old is Nazarbayev?
So this is a very big
He's not
question.
young either.
Yeah, and then both speakers actually underlined that it's kind of irrational and at least in the short run it's not beneficial. Khairat, you would like to answer the comment?
Concerning this political will. So of course there is a political will, I think, but there are different political wills. So each country has its own politics, and it's not like Europe. They have some kind of common goal of preserving peace and others, but here each country has its own understanding of why they need Eurasian region in terms of politics, of course. I'm not very much expert in kind of security issues, and approaching from constructivist point of view, it's securitization, whether like Kyrgyzstan really needs Russia as a security provider, or whether Russia is security provider or mess provider. I don't know. It's different issues, so I will not go there. I'm not expert in that case. But when it comes to economics, for example, I agree with this sequencing that. But I still have this maybe comment or question. Wouldn't it be more beneficial for Kyrgyzstan to join earlier? Because if you join earlier, then you can influence the negotiations or somehow influence the outcome of these negotiations. But if you join late, you accept all the rules of the game that's set by core. And anyway, you have, as you said, like costs. A cost for Kyrgyzstan, the cost started in 2010. Yeah, because when they have this common external tariff, and Russia invested in the tightening borders of Kazakhstan with China and also with Kyrgyzstan in order to prevent re-export of Chinese products. So at that time, Kyrgyzstan has already started to incur the cost of this customs union. So that's sequencing.
That this sequence actually happens really over time, as the theory here portends. It is still a little bit of a puzzle in the paper that we have on that, because the more original models actually are temporal one. And yes, so there's certainly still something that needs to be explained. I mean, probably with that Russia probably prefer to negotiate with a different government. That certainly is part of, must probably be part of the story as well.
And in terms of maybe Chinese threat, I don't know, maybe it can be exaggerated to some extent. I'm not sure that the Eurasian Economic Union is only, maybe it played some role there. The increasing influence of China and having this Eurasian Economic Union, but I don't think it's a kind of primary goal there. It's one of the primary issues there. Because nowadays, I think especially after Crimea, Russia is more considered as a threat to some extent, rather than China. China mostly playing aggressive politics in this eastern part. Yeah, the South China Sea conflict. I stayed there for, let's say, in Cambodia, for example, for around 3 years, and it's a big issue there. It's a big conflict there. So China is more involved there. Whether it will turn to this side.
Okay. Any other questions before we go for coffee break? We are already taking time for coffee break. No? Then just a quick summary of what we talked about. So at some point we all agree that all economists in the room, or at least what we have spoken, that we all agree that joining the customs units has negative costs. I mean, it has costs and it has negative consequences for the whole, at least the member states, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan mentioned. And Gerald talked about negative consequences and pressure from, and then compensation mechanism. And then we all agree that the reasons, at least in the short run, are not clear, but maybe in the long run it's clear. Maybe it's based on the national development strategy in the long term, what Khairat was talking about. But maybe it's also based on just political will of few people in, as Vladimir mentioned, in oppressive countries. And I think this is very interesting topic we discussed today. And I would like to thank the two presenters and speakers, guest speakers today. Thank you very much.